Sir, this ticket looks fake. You need to leave this seat immediately. The sharp, commanding voice of flight attendant Sarah Klein sliced through the quiet first-class cabin of Delta Airlines, Flight 512. Her words hit like a slap, freezing the entire row of passengers in stunned silence. Before we continue, let me know where you're watching from. Subscribe to the channel and don't forget to hit like. Your support helps us bring you more powerful, true-to-life stories like this. Now, let's get into it. Marcus Hale, a tall, composed man in his mid-40s, slowly looked up from his boarding pass. He wasn't just any passenger. Marcus was the CEO of Hale Equity Group, a private investment firm holding 18.4% ownership of Delta Airlines, worth over $1.2 billion. But today, dressed simply in a navy blue suit and quiet confidence, nobody recognized him. He had deliberately booked Seat 1A in first class under a discreet name, conducting his own secret evaluation of Delta's customer service. He wanted to see how his investment was being managed, but he never expected this moment to spiral into a corporate reckoning. Sarah didn't give Marcus a chance to explain. She snatched the boarding pass from his hand, glanced at it without scanning, and shook her head. "We've had problems with counterfeit upgrades lately. You'll need to step aside until we confirm," she said coldly, then turned to a white passenger standing nearby. "Mr. Brooks, please, this is your seat. We'll handle this mix-up." That white passenger was Ethan Brooks, a mid-level executive rushing to Los Angeles for a product launch. He gave Marcus a dismissive look, muttering under his breath, "Figures." It was quiet, but not quiet enough. Marcus heard it. So did the couple in 2A and the Latina journalist Lisa Ramirez, seated in 2C. Lisa instinctively unlocked her phone, recording discreetly. She had seen subtle prejudice before, but something about Sarah's tone and Ethan's smugness made her uneasy. Marcus stayed calm, lowering his voice to keep control. "Ma'am, this is my seat. I paid for this ticket weeks ago. Please scan it before making assumptions." But Sarah ignored him. Within seconds, Elena Vargas, the chief flight attendant, approached, instead of diffusing the situation. She backed Sarah without question. "Sir, our records don't show your name in 1A. You'll need to step into the aisle while we sort this out." The tension in the cabin thickened. A few passengers leaned out to watch. Others pulled out phones to record. Time was running down. Boarding would close in 20 minutes. David Lawson, the ground supervisor, arrived next, visibly annoyed. "What's the holdup?" Elena explained quickly, framing Marcus as the issue, without verifying a thing. David frowned and crossed his arms. "Sir, if you don't comply, we'll have to remove you from this aircraft." That was when Olivia Grant, a security officer, stepped in. Olivia, a black woman herself, had seen situations like this unfold too many times. She took Marcus's ticket and quietly scanned it on her handheld device. The green light confirmed it instantly. Valid first-class ticket. Seat 1A. She looked up at Elena and Sarah. "It's legit. He belongs here." But instead of apologizing, Sarah's lips tightened. "We'll still need management approval." "There have been too many false confirmations lately," she insisted, her tone sharp, condescending, dripping with quiet bias. Marcus exhaled slowly. He could feel the eyes of the entire cabin on him. Ethan sighed dramatically, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Can we just get on with it? I've got real business to handle." Sarah turned to Ethan with a reassuring smile. "Don't worry. Sir, we'll make sure you're taken care of." That was the final straw for Lisa Ramirez. She hit go live on her stream. "Ladies and gentlemen," she whispered to her viewers, "I think we're watching something important right now." Within 2 minutes, over 1,200 viewers tuned in, comments flying in real time. Some supported Marcus, others argued, but everyone agreed. The optics were ugly. Marcus adjusted his tie and stood, Meeting Sarah's eyes directly, his voice was steady, deep, controlled. "I'll wait, but I suggest you double-check your data before making assumptions." Yet, behind his calm, his mind was racing. He wasn't angry about being questioned. He was angry about how he was being questioned. No one had verified his information. No one had scanned his pass. And no one had spoken to him with the dignity every paying customer deserves. This wasn't just personal anymore. This was systemic. And Marcus knew one thing. Every second of this was being recorded. Not just by Lisa's live stream, but by the airline's internal cabin surveillance, which he himself had quietly invested in 6 months ago. What none of them realized. Not Sarah, not Elena, not David, not even Ethan. Was that this entire flight was part of Marcus's secret audit on Delta's diversity and inclusion policies? But tonight, Delta wasn't just failing the audit. They were setting themselves up for a corporate firestorm at the front of the cabin. Boarding continued chaotically, passengers whispering to one another, some supportive, others skeptical. Lisa's live stream soared past 3,000 viewers, with hashtags and shares exploding on social media. Still, Marcus remained seated quietly in the aisle now, hands folded on his briefcase, face expressionless but unshaken. He knew his silence was power. He didn't need to raise his voice. Not yet. Because soon, the entire world would know exactly who they were talking to. The tension inside Delta Flight 512 grew thicker by the second. Marcus remained seated near the aisle, hands resting on his briefcase, his expression calm but unreadable. Across from him, Sarah Klein stood stiff, arms crossed, convinced she was right. Elena Vargas, the chief flight attendant, whispered sharply into her earpiece, glancing at Marcus like he was a problem to be removed, not a paying customer. And then David Lawson, the ground supervisor, returned, this time louder, impatient, and visibly irritated. "Sir, I need you to step out of the cabin right now while we sort this," David said firmly, his voice carrying over the quiet hum of passengers whispering among themselves. Olivia Grant, the security officer who had already verified Marcus's ticket, stepped forward again. "His boarding pass is valid. It's already been scanned and confirmed. There's no reason to move him." But David brushed her off, muttering something about avoiding delays and keeping operations smooth. That's when Marcus spoke, his tone low and deliberate, forcing David to lean in to hear him. "Are you removing me? Because you think my ticket is fake? Or because you assume I shouldn't be here?" The question landed like a stone in still water. For a brief moment, there was silence. Then, from behind them, Ethan Brooks groaned loudly, shaking his head. "This is ridiculous," he said, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "Why are we wasting time on this? Some of us have actual business to handle in L.A. Sarah turned to him with a sympathetic smile, nodding as if she agreed. "Don't worry, Mr. Brooks. We're handling it." Marcus caught Ethan's smug look and tucked it away silently. He wasn't going to respond. Not yet. But passengers were watching closely now. A woman in 3C whispered, "Why won't they just scan his ticket properly?" Another passenger, a middle-aged man in 4A, raised his phone to record, his jaw tight with frustration. Lisa Ramirez's live stream kept climbing, 2,500 viewers, then 3,800, then 5,200 within minutes. Comments were flooding in. "That's racial profiling right there. Scan the ticket. Stay calm. Brother, we see you." But Sarah wasn't backing down. She stepped closer, lowering her voice in a tone meant only for Marcus, but loud enough that nearby passengers caught every word. "Listen, sir. First class is for our premium clients. You're making this more complicated than it needs to be." The words stung, and Marcus could feel heat rising in his chest, but his face remained perfectly composed. Olivia's eyes widened. She had heard it too, but David still didn't intervene. Instead, He gestured for Marcus to stand up. "Sir, I'm asking you for the last time. Step into the jet bridge while we sort this out, or I'll have to escalate." The threat hung in the air. Passengers gasped softly, a few whispered nervously, sensing the situation spiraling out of control. And then, out of nowhere, Lisa's live stream jumped past 9,000 live viewers, the chat exploding in outrage. Someone had clipped Sarah's premium client's remark and pushed it onto Twitter. Within seconds, it was spreading like wildfire, but Marcus still didn't raise his voice. He looked at Olivia, gave her a subtle nod, and stood up slowly, sliding his boarding pass into his breast pocket. He stepped into the aisle, but his briefcase stayed in his hand. He wasn't leaving the plane. Not yet. As Marcus stood, Sarah immediately guided Ethan toward seat 1A. Smiling politely as if she had solved a problem, Ethan dropped into the seat, adjusting his cufflinks like he'd just won a battle. Several passengers exchanged uneasy glances. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Lisa zoomed in on Marcus's calm face and whispered into her phone's mic. "He's handling this with more dignity than anyone else here." David motioned toward the front of the plane. "Sir, this way. Please." But Marcus didn't move. He turned his gaze directly on David, his voice steady, every word deliberate. "You should be very certain about the next decision you make." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. And David hesitated for the first time all evening. Meanwhile, Lisa's stream hit 12,000 live viewers. Multiple media outlets were already embedding her feed. The incident was trending nationwide under a single word: Delta, in the back. A couple of college students whispered excitedly, texting friends, "This guy's about to blow up the internet." Sarah, however, doubled down, walking past Marcus without making eye contact, muttering under her breath just loud enough for Lisa's mic to catch, "Some people just don't belong in first class." That single sentence triggered an eruption online. Lisa's viewers jumped past 18,000 instantly, the chat scrolling faster than she could read. Comments like, "Fire her now" and "Delta is done" filled the screen. But Marcus said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than their arrogance. Olivia finally stepped closer, lowering her voice to Marcus. "I've seen this before. I know what's happening. You're being targeted," she said softly. Glancing toward Sarah and David, Marcus nodded slightly. "I know," he replied calmly. "But it ends today. By now." Boarding was delayed, departure time ticking down dangerously close. The pilot had called twice, demanding the cabin be secured, but no one wanted to make the final decision. David looked torn, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Ethan reclined casually in Marcus's seat, smirking every time their eyes met. Lisa kept recording, knowing something monumental was unfolding. And then, as the tension reached its breaking point, Marcus slid his briefcase onto his lap and rested his hand gently on the clasp. Inside were documents that would change everything. Inside was proof of who he was, and exactly how much power he held over this airline. But he wasn't ready to reveal it. Not yet. Not until they forced his hand completely. In the meantime, Lisa's stream crossed 25,000 live viewers. CNN producers were clipping the confrontation. Twitter threads were exploding. Hashtags were multiplying by the second. And still, Marcus sat there, silent, patient, steady, letting Sarah, Elena, and David keep digging themselves deeper. Across the cabin, a businessman whispered to his wife, "I think they're about to make the biggest mistake of their careers." He was right, because Marcus Hale wasn't just any passenger. He was the man who quietly held $1.2 billion of this airline in his hands. And soon, everyone in that cabin, everyone watching online, and everyone sitting in the Delta boardroom thousands of miles away was about to find out exactly who they had just humiliated for 15 long minutes. Marcus Hale sat silently in the aisle of Delta Flight 512, watching Sarah, Elena, and David fumble their way deeper into a mess they didn't yet understand. Ethan Brooks was lounging arrogantly in Marcus's rightful seat, sipping sparkling water like victory tasted sweet. The tension in the first-class cabin was unbearable. Whispers, nervous glances, phones raised. Lisa Ramirez's live stream now crossing 25,000 live viewers. Then, with deliberate calm, Marcus opened his briefcase and pulled out a single matte black business card. He held it between his fingers for a moment, letting the silence stretch until even the hum of the engines seemed to fade. Finally, he spoke. Low, steady, commanding. "Ms. Vargas," he said, addressing the chief flight attendant. "Before you continue making assumptions, you should probably read this." He handed her the card without another word. Elena took it impatiently, her expression still sharp. But as her eyes landed on the embossed silver letters, her entire face shifted. Her lips parted slightly, her breath caught, and her eyes darted back to Marcus. Her voice faltered for the first time. You're the CEO of Hale Equity Group?" Marcus nodded slowly, never breaking eye contact. "Correct. And as of this morning, Hale Equity owns 18.4% of Delta Airlines. That's roughly $1.2 billion of your company. Ms. Vargas, would you like to try explaining again why I'm being treated like I don't belong here?" The cabin fell dead silent. Ethan Brooks froze mid-sip, his glass trembling slightly in his hand. Sarah Klein, who had stood tall and unyielding just minutes earlier, blinked rapidly as if her mind couldn't process the words. David Lawson's arms dropped to his sides, his confident posture collapsing instantly. And in the second row, Lisa Ramirez's phone buzzed wildly. Her live stream had just exploded past 4,000 live viewers. Comments were flooding in faster than she could read. "He owns the airline. Delta's about to get sued. This is going to CNN right now." Marcus let the weight of his words hang in the air before continuing, his tone calm but sharp enough to cut glass. "This flight," he said slowly, "wasn't just a trip to Los Angeles. It's part of an internal audit, a test, commissioned by my firm, evaluating how Delta treats its passengers, especially its minority customers. I wasn't going to reveal this until after the audit was complete, but since we've escalated this far, I think transparency is overdue." He turned his gaze directly towards Sarah. "Congratulations, Ms. Klein. You've just failed spectacularly." Sarah's cheeks flushed crimson, her composure cracking. I was just following procedure," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Procedure? Without scanning my ticket? Without verifying my status? Or was it procedure to decide, based on a glance, that I didn't belong in first class?" Sarah's lips quivered, but she had no answer. Elena shifted uncomfortably, trying to regain control. "Mr. Hale, we had no idea who you were." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his voice quiet but firm. "And that's exactly the problem. You shouldn't have to know my name to treat me with basic dignity." Lisa's live stream soared past 55,000 live viewers now, trending #1 on Twitter under hashtag DeltaFlight512. National news outlets were embedding the video within minutes. Stock market analysts were already speculating on Delta's exposure. Meanwhile, Ethan Brooks, suddenly realizing the gravity of the situation, slid out of Marcus's seat without a word, standing awkwardly in the aisle, avoiding Marcus's gaze entirely. Marcus didn't even look at him. Instead, he tapped his phone, pulling up a live market tracker. He turned the screen toward David Lawson. "In the last 12 minutes since Lisa started her live stream," Marcus said evenly, "Delta's stock has lost $1.8 billion in market value. Do you understand what that means for your leadership team?" David swallowed hard, nodding faintly. sweat beading on his forehead. Marcus leaned back, folding his hands. "I suggest you call Atlanta. Right now. At the back of the cabin." A hush fell over the passengers. Every eye was on Marcus, phones tilted toward him, capturing every movement, every syllable. Olivia Grant, the security officer, stepped slightly closer, her voice calm but firm. "Mr. Hale," she said softly, "how do you want to proceed?" Marcus gave a small nod, his tone measured. "For now. Ms. Grant, I'll return to my seat, but Sarah, Elena, and David will step aside until Delta's executive team calls me directly. Nobody touches another passenger until then." Elena hesitated but nodded stiffly, motioning Sarah to move toward the galley. Sarah obeyed, her face pale, her hands shaking slightly. Ethan slumped back into 2D, suddenly small and quiet. Lisa's viewers crossed 7,000, the chat filling with fire emojis and disbelief. CNN, MSNBC, and Fox were all pushing breaking alerts within seconds. Marcus finally sat back in 1A, reclaiming his seat without a word, placing his briefcase carefully beneath him, for the first time since the confrontation began. He allowed himself a small breath. But the battle wasn't over, not even close. Across the aisle, David scrambled to his phone, dialing Delta's Atlanta headquarters. Marcus overheard snippets. "Yes, sir. Hale Equity. Yes. Marcus Hale. Yes. The live stream is everywhere." The color drained from David's face as he listened, his voice trembling when he hung up. He looked at Marcus, his tone quiet, almost deferential now. "Mr. Hale, headquarters will be in contact shortly." Marcus didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence was a power they couldn't match. Lisa zoomed in on him for her viewers and whispered, "This is the moment everything changes." And she was right. Within 30 minutes. Executives in Atlanta would be drafting emergency statements. Within an hour. Major investors at BlackRock and Vanguard would be on calls demanding answers. And within 24 hours, Delta would be forced to choose between protecting a broken culture or rebuilding it entirely. But for now, inside the cabin of Flight 512, Marcus Hale, the quiet man they tried to humiliate, had just flipped the entire power dynamic upside down, and everyone, from first class to economy, knew it. The silence in Delta Flight 512 was deafening after Marcus Hale revealed his identity. No one dared breathe too loudly. The tension was so thick you could feel it pressing against your chest. David Lawson, the ground supervisor who minutes earlier threatened to remove Marcus, stood frozen by the cabin door, clutching his phone like a lifeline. Across the aisle, Sarah Klein and Elena Vargas huddled by the galley, whispering furiously, their faces pale, movements restless. Ethan Brooks, once smug and entitled, sat stiffly in 2D, staring at the seatbelt buckle in front of him as though wishing he could disappear. Meanwhile, Lisa Ramirez's live stream had just exploded past 88,000 live viewers and rising fast. Social media had already named the incident Delta Flight 512, with clips flooding X, TikTok, and Instagram within minutes. Cable news channels began embedding Lisa's feed, and the entire nation was watching this plane in real time. Marcus, sitting calmly in 1A now, reached for his phone, scrolling through a private chat thread with his operations team at Hale Equity Group. He typed just 7 words: "Activate oversight protocol, full monitoring, live data." Seconds later, 3 executives in Hale's New York office launched a crisis dashboard showing live sentiment analysis, market shifts, and streaming audience metrics. A soft chime came from Marcus's phone. Delta's CEO William Hayes was calling from Atlanta. Marcus answered on speaker, his tone polite but clipped. "Mr. Hayes." William's voice cracked slightly on the other end. "Marcus, I just saw the live stream. We're deeply concerned. I want to assure you personally this isn't Delta's culture. Give me an hour to get our board aligned, and we'll resolve this. Marcus's reply was calm but sharp, every syllable deliberate. You don't have an hour. William, you have 10 minutes. The cabin collectively inhaled at his words. David's head snapped toward Marcus, eyes wide with panic. Sarah gripped the edge of the galley counter until her knuckles turned white. Elena pulled out her phone, texting furiously, probably trying to salvage her position. Marcus leaned forward, his elbows resting lightly on his knees, speaking clearly for everyone within earshot. Here's what's going to happen, he said evenly. Sarah Klein and David Lawson are suspended immediately. Effective right now, their badges, their access, everything. He turned his gaze to Ethan Brooks, who squirmed under the weight of it. And Mr. Brooks, your remarks and conduct are being logged into Delta's passenger incident database. Your behavior will be flagged with the FAA. Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but thought better of it. Lowering his eyes, Olivia Grant, the black security officer who had verified Marcus's ticket from the beginning, stepped closer and asked softly, Do you want me to escort them off the plane? Sir? Marcus shook his head. No. They'll stay right here until Delta leadership confirms my directives. The call with William Hayes was still active on speaker, and Marcus's composure never wavered. William, he said, this isn't just about me. This is systemic. It's time Delta acknowledges that. William's voice lowered, careful, tense. I hear you. What are you asking for? Marcus glanced briefly at Lisa's phone, where the live viewer count surged past 100,000. He knew every word was being broadcast. First, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the hush. I want an immediate internal investigation into Delta's discrimination complaints, published publicly within 30 days. Second, I want a mandatory 50-hour anti-bias training program for all frontline staff, funded directly by Delta's executive operations budget. Third, I want the board's approval tonight for the HAIL initiative, $140 million dedicated to AI-powered cabin monitoring and scholarships for minority students pursuing aviation careers. William hesitated, his breath audible through the speaker. Marcus, that's non-negotiable. Marcus interrupted firmly. If Delta refuses, HAIL Equity will begin divesting its $1.2 billion in holdings effective tomorrow morning, and I promise you, William, I won't be the only investor walking. The tension in the cabin spiked. A murmur rippled through the passengers. Lisa's viewers skyrocketed past 12,000, her chat flooded with disbelief and fire emojis. Headlines were already drafting themselves across the internet. Delta faces $1.2 billion threat amid first-class bias scandal. David Lawson's phone buzzed with incoming messages, but his hands shook too badly to answer. Sarah leaned against the galley wall, blinking rapidly, tears threatening to fall but refusing to drop. Elena tried to stay composed, but her voice cracked when she whispered to Sarah, We're finished. Marcus finally ended the call, sliding his phone back into his pocket, and addressed the cabin directly, his voice soft but commanding. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. This flight will depart in 10 minutes once leadership confirms immediate policy actions. Thank you for your patience. A few passengers began to clap quietly, hesitant but supportive. Olivia crossed her arms and stepped beside Marcus like an unspoken shield, her presence strong and steady. Lisa zoomed in on Marcus's calm profile, whispering into her mic for her viewers. You're watching history right now. Moments later, David's phone rang again. He stared at the caller ID, Delta HQ, before answering in a hushed tone. Yes, understood. He lowered the phone, visibly pale, and turned to Marcus. Mr. Hale, headquarters has approved your directives. Sarah Klein and I are suspended effective immediately. Delta leadership will contact you tonight to finalize the HAIL initiative. Marcus nodded once, his expression neutral. He didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He simply replied, Good. Let's make sure this never happens again. Sarah turned toward Marcus, her lips trembling. Mr. Hale, I didn't mean... Marcus raised a hand gently, stopping her mid-sentence. Ms. Klein, intent doesn't erase impact. Take this time to reflect. Sarah lowered her gaze, silent, tears finally slipping free. Ethan Brooks shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact altogether. Lisa's viewer count hit 14,500, trending #1 globally now. With clips of Marcus's quiet authority going viral across every platform, news anchors were calling him the man who turned an airline upside down mid-flight. And yet, through it all, Marcus remained composed, his breathing steady, his voice measured. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for every passenger who had ever been told they didn't belong. As the engines powered up and boarding finally closed, the cabin lights dimmed slightly. Marcus leaned back in his seat, resting one hand on his briefcase, his thoughts already moving to the bigger battle ahead. Because this wasn't over. The live stream was only the beginning. Within hours, the Delta board would convene an emergency session. Within days, the FAA would issue formal inquiries, and within weeks, the airline industry itself would face unprecedented scrutiny. Marcus knew one thing with absolute certainty. By the time this was over, the way airlines treated their passengers would never be the same again. 2 hours after Delta Flight 512 finally took off, an emergency board meeting was underway at Delta's headquarters in Atlanta. The stakes had never been higher. Screens across the conference room displayed real-time metrics. Marcus Hale's confrontation had amassed over 11.2 million views in just 3 hours. Delta's stock had dropped 8.7% since boarding, and the hashtag Delta Flight 512 was trending worldwide. Inside the glass-walled boardroom, Delta's CEO William Hayes looked pale as he addressed the executive committee. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice trembling slightly, "we are facing the most severe public relations crisis in our company's history. Marcus Hale owns 18.4% of this airline. He's on that plane right now, streaming live to hundreds of thousands, and we've mishandled this from the start." Around the table sat Delta's CFO Linda Reynolds, COO Mark Chen, legal counsel, PR strategists, and 4 representatives from Delta's largest institutional investors, including BlackRock and Vanguard. None of them looked happy. Maria Gonzalez, regional director, spoke first, slamming her pen against the table. "This isn't just a PR nightmare, William. This is operational malpractice. We ignored valid documentation, humiliated an investor, and broadcast systemic bias to the entire world." Linda, the CFO, tapped her tablet, pulling up the numbers. "We've lost $2.4 billion in market cap since Lisa Ramirez went live. If we don't stabilize investor confidence immediately, we're looking at a credit downgrade within 48 hours. A murmur rippled through the room. Then the speakerphone crackled, and Marcus's voice came through, calm, steady, commanding. "Good evening, everyone. I assume you've seen the numbers?" Silence followed. No one dared interrupt him. Marcus continued. "Let me be clear. I didn't create this crisis. Your team did. You've known for years that Delta has a systemic issue with bias complaints. 612 formal reports filed last year alone, 58% involving racial discrimination. I gave this company every chance to address the problem quietly, but today proved to me, and to the world, that quiet isn't working anymore." William Hayes leaned toward the mic, his voice soft, pleading. "Marcus, we made mistakes. Yes, but we're ready to work with you. Tell us what you want." Marcus didn't hesitate. "You already know what I want. The Hale Initiative. $140 million invested in 3 pillars. First, 50-hour mandatory anti-bias training for every Delta employee, including executives. Second, AI-powered cabin monitoring systems that flag discriminatory behavior in real time. And third, a $50 million aviation scholarship fund for minority students. If this board does not vote yes tonight, I will begin divesting my $1.2 billion in holdings at market open. And I can assure you, BlackRock, Vanguard, and every ESG-focused fund will follow my lead. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes. Finally, Victor Lang, Vanguard's representative, cleared his throat and spoke firmly. Mr. Hale is right. Our institutional clients demand diversity accountability. Delta cannot afford another incident like this. Across the table, Angela Morris from BlackRock nodded. If Delta fails to act, our ESG funds will divest immediately. This isn't negotiable. The pressure inside the boardroom hit a breaking point. William looked around the table, sweat beading on his forehead, and finally spoke. All in favor of adopting the Hale Initiative? One by one. Hands rose. CFO Linda Reynolds raised hers first. COO. Mark Chen followed reluctantly. Maria Gonzalez raised hers without hesitation. Investor representatives nodded unanimously. Within 30 seconds, the decision was unanimous. Delta Airlines had approved $140 million in reforms on the spot. The entire room exhaled in unison. But Marcus wasn't finished. One more thing. He said calmly, Sarah Klein and David Lawson, suspended, effective immediately. Elena Vargas, reassigned pending retraining. And this needs to be communicated publicly within the next hour. Transparency isn't optional anymore. William nodded quickly, scribbling notes furiously. Done, he said. We'll issue the statement. Marcus paused briefly before delivering his final words. Understand this. William, this isn't about saving Delta's stock price. This is about rebuilding trust. Because today, Delta didn't just humiliate me. You humiliated millions of people who saw themselves in that cabin, on the plane. Lisa Ramirez was still live streaming. Her viewer count had crossed 5,000, with national outlets now embedding Marcus's comments from the boardroom call, in real time. Passengers watched Marcus dismantle decades of corporate complacency from his seat in 1A. Sarah sat silently in the galley, trembling, wiping at her swollen eyes. David stared at the carpet, pale and motionless, fully aware his career was over. Ethan Brooks shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding Marcus entirely, no longer smug, no longer defiant. Meanwhile, Olivia Grant, the security officer who had defended Marcus from the start, received a text notification. Her promotion to Director of Passenger Equity Initiatives had just been approved by Delta leadership. Lisa whispered into her mic. Everyone watching this, you're seeing change happen live, right now, on this plane. The chat exploded. Fire emojis, applause emojis, messages of solidarity from around the world. CNN, MSNBC, and Fox ran simultaneous breaking banners. Delta approves $140 million reform package after first-class bias incident on social media. Marcus's calm authority became an emblem of dignity under pressure. His words, bias is costly, accountability builds futures, went viral overnight, quoted by influencers, CEOs, and civil rights leaders alike. Yet Marcus remained composed, speaking to no one, simply gazing out the window as city lights sparkled far below. He knew this victory wasn't personal, it was systemic. And while this battle had been won, the war for equity was only beginning. Across the country, other airlines were watching closely, their boards calling emergency sessions, their PR teams scrambling to review internal policies. Delta had been forced into reform, but the ripple effect was just starting to spread. By the time Flight 512 landed in Los Angeles, Marcus Hale had gone from being a passenger fighting for dignity to a man reshaping an entire industry in real time. And everyone knew this was only the beginning. 6 months after Delta Flight 512, the airline industry was almost unrecognizable. What began as a humiliating confrontation in a first-class cabin had transformed into a sweeping movement for equity, accountability, and systemic reform. The Hale Initiative, approved that night under immense pressure, had rolled out across every Delta hub nationwide. Its impact was staggering. Internal data showed customer discrimination complaints had dropped 38%. Minority passenger satisfaction had surged 24%, and overall trust scores reached record highs. Every Delta employee, from executives to flight attendants, had completed the 50-hour anti-bias training program, which became a case study for Harvard Business School. The AI-powered cabin monitoring system, once controversial, had already flagged 47 incidents for early intervention, preventing multiple passenger escalations before they could spiral into public scandals. Delta's investment in aviation scholarships was equally transformative. 62 minority students had already been awarded full funding to pursue careers as pilots, engineers, and aviation executives. Marcus Hale hadn't just influenced Delta's policies, he'd forced an entire industry to reevaluate its culture. The FAA, inspired by Delta's reforms, passed new mandates requiring all U.S. airlines to adopt 48-hour reporting deadlines for bias-related complaints and to maintain full public transparency on disciplinary actions. Within months, major carriers like United, American, and Southwest followed suit, adopting their own versions of the Hale Initiative to avoid investor backlash. But beyond the statistics, the personal stories defined the movement's heart. Lisa Ramirez, the freelance journalist whose live stream captured the entire confrontation, had become one of the most recognizable names in digital media. CNN hired her as a full-time correspondent within 3 months, and her Emmy-winning documentary, Flight 512, The Day Dignity Took Off, became the highest-streamed investigative special of the year. Her voice on that day had amplified millions of unheard voices, and she used her newfound platform to advocate for corporate accountability nationwide. Olivia Grant, the security officer who verified Marcus's ticket and quietly stood by his side, was promoted to Director of Passenger Equity Initiatives at Delta. She now led a 200-person team dedicated to ensuring fairness in every aspect of customer service. Olivia often said in interviews, "All I did was do my job right, but that day showed me just how many people needed someone to stand up for them." For Sarah Klein, the former flight attendant whose bias triggered the confrontation, the journey was more complicated, but no less powerful. After a mandatory 6-month suspension, Sarah voluntarily enrolled in counseling and diversity education programs far beyond Delta's requirements. In a rare interview, she admitted, "That day broke me, but it also woke me up. I didn't realize how deep my assumptions ran. Marcus gave me a chance to grow by not destroying me publicly when he could have." Sarah later became an internal trainer for Delta's new inclusion program, sharing her story candidly with thousands of employees. Her redemption arc became one of the most watched segments of Lisa's CNN documentary, with viewers praising Marcus's ability to balance accountability with humanity. Ethan Brooks, the white passenger who had once muttered "figures" under his breath, experienced his own transformation. Initially defensive and combative, Ethan was called into HR after Lisa's live stream exposed his comments to millions. Rather than firing him, Marcus arranged for Ethan to join a mentorship initiative pairing corporate leaders with minority entrepreneurs. 6 months later, Ethan had publicly apologized on LinkedIn, joined Delta's Equity Advisory Council, and began mentoring students from underrepresented communities entering the aviation industry. "I was part of the problem," he said in an op-ed for Forbes. "Marcus didn't humiliate me. He showed me a mirror. That changed everything." Meanwhile, Delta's CEO William Hayes had survived the immediate fallout, but not without consequences. Under immense investor pressure, Delta overhauled its entire leadership culture, tying executive bonuses to diversity performance metrics for the first time in its history. In a groundbreaking press conference, William publicly acknowledged systemic bias within the company and thanked Marcus for forcing Delta to confront its blind spots. The reaction was swift and unprecedented. Delta's stock rebounded within 4 months, climbing 15% above pre-incident levels as institutional investors praised the reforms beyond the corporate world. Marcus Hale became a household name, not for grand speeches or fiery confrontations, but for his calm, relentless leverage of economic power to drive social justice. Harvard Business Review featured him on the cover, calling him the architect of quiet power. Time magazine named him one of its top 100 most influential people, highlighting his ability to balance dignity with discipline, empathy with authority. Yet Marcus remained private, rarely granting interviews. He rejected book deals, declined speaking circuits, and stayed focused on Hale Equity Group's broader mission, dismantling systemic inequities in industries far beyond aviation. But when he did speak, his words carried weight. At the National Aviation Equity Conference, he stood before hundreds of executives, policymakers, and students and said simply, "Bias is expensive. Inclusion builds futures. Choose wisely." The line went viral instantly, cementing his reputation as a thought leader who needed no theatrics to inspire change. Back at Delta, the results were undeniable. Anonymous employee surveys showed a 64% increase in frontline job satisfaction. Attrition dropped to its lowest level in a decade, and customer service ratings reached an all-time high. Major publications dubbed the transformation the Flight 512 effect. At Harvard Business School, an entire case study was dedicated to the incident, dissecting how a single confrontation catalyzed a $140 million industry-wide shift. At CNN, Lisa's documentary continued to dominate streaming platforms, drawing millions of views worldwide. Sarah Klein became a keynote speaker at diversity summits. Ethan Brooks quietly mentored dozens of minority students entering executive training programs. Olivia Grant's division became the blueprint for passenger equity initiatives globally. And through it all, Marcus stayed grounded, investing time and resources into Hale Equity's scholarship pipeline, visiting classrooms, and meeting young aviation students whose careers were made possible by Flight 512's aftermath. To many, Marcus wasn't just a CEO anymore. He was living proof that one quiet stand, backed by economic leverage and unshakable dignity, could ignite systemic reform faster than lawsuits or protests ever could. The ripple effects reached even further than Marcus expected. Within 6 months, several Fortune 500 companies, from banking to hospitality to tech, adopted similar accountability frameworks, citing Flight 512 as their turning point. Regulators began drafting nationwide standards for corporate anti-bias practices, and investors across Wall Street shifted strategies, tying billions of dollars to ESG scoring transparency. What began as humiliation for one man had become a blueprint for change across an entire economy. Yet when asked how he felt about becoming a symbol of dignity, Marcus offered the same answer every time. It was never about me. It was about everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. Flight 512 was just the spark. The real work starts now. 6 months after the confrontation on Delta Flight 512, the air inside the National Aviation Equity Conference in Washington, D.C. was electric. Hundreds of airline executives, government officials, investors, and students filled the grand hall, waiting in silence. Cameras from every major network lined the aisles. The backdrop displayed one name in bold letters, Marcus Hale. As Marcus walked onto the stage, the room rose to its feet in a standing ovation that lasted nearly 2 full minutes. He stood at the podium, composed and quiet as ever, letting the applause settle before speaking his first words. 6 months ago, he began, his deep voice resonating clearly. I boarded a flight from New York to Los Angeles expecting a routine trip. Instead, I was reminded of something far too familiar for far too many. What it feels like to be told, without words but through action, that you don't belong. The room fell silent, hanging on every syllable. Marcus continued. But Flight 512 was never just about me. It was about every passenger who has ever been judged before they've been spoken to. Every customer who's ever been treated as less than. Every employee who's ever been forced to choose between their dignity and their paycheck. He paused, scanning the crowd, his gaze steady, commanding without force. That day, a single confrontation triggered something larger than all of us. It forced us to confront the truth. Bias isn't just immoral, it's expensive. And dignity isn't optional anymore. It's non-negotiable. Cameras clicked rapidly, flashes filling the hall, but Marcus never broke his rhythm. The Hail Initiative, which began on that plane, has now reshaped an entire industry. In just 6 months, discrimination complaints across Delta have dropped 38%. Customer satisfaction is at a record high, and 62 scholarships have been awarded to minority students pursuing careers in aviation, students who, in just a few years, will become the pilots, engineers, and executives leading the next generation. A ripple of applause filled the room, but Marcus raised a hand gently, signaling for silence. "This isn't just Delta's victory," he said. "The FAA has adopted new reporting standards, forcing every airline in this country to publicly disclose bias-related complaints within 48 hours. United, American, Southwest, all of them have followed suit, and beyond aviation. We're seeing change ripple through banking, hospitality, and tech. Corporate America is finally learning a simple lesson. Inclusion builds futures, and silence costs billions." In the front row, Lisa Ramirez wiped away tears. Her live stream from Flight 512 had changed her life, taking her from a struggling freelance journalist to a full-time CNN correspondent. Beside her sat Olivia Grant, the former security officer, now director of passenger equity initiatives, whose leadership had become a model for airlines worldwide. A few seats down, Sarah Klein sat quietly, hands folded in her lap. Her suspension had ended, but instead of returning to first-class service, Sarah now trained Delta's new recruits, teaching bias awareness from the perspective of her own painful mistakes. Marcus had invited her personally, a decision that drew whispers from critics but earned standing respect from reform advocates. Next to Sarah was Ethan Brooks, the passenger whose dismissive remarks had gone viral 6 months ago. Ethan's arrogance had nearly cost him his career. Today, he was one of the leading mentors in Delta's diversity and leadership program, pairing minority entrepreneurs with corporate executives. When reporters asked Ethan how he felt sitting in this room, his voice cracked slightly as he said, "I came here to listen, and to do better." Marcus shifted his weight, resting his hands lightly on the podium. "I've been asked many times why I didn't sue Delta," he said, "why I didn't use my power to destroy careers, and the answer is simple. You don't change systems by burning them down. You change them by holding them accountable and showing them how to build something better." The room erupted in applause, this time louder, sustained, unrestrained. Marcus waited patiently, his expression calm but his presence magnetic. "We've learned something these past 6 months," he continued softly, letting his words carry across the hall. "Real reform doesn't start in boardrooms. It starts where dignity is tested, in small interactions, on ordinary days, in the choices employees make when no one is watching." Flight 512 wasn't just a moment. It became a mirror, and what we saw staring back wasn't easy to face. But we faced it anyway. As Marcus spoke, screens behind him displayed real data, rising equity scores, increased minority hiring, improved retention rates, and scholarship recipient testimonials. One clip showed a young black student from Atlanta, her voice trembling with pride as she said, "Because of the Hail Initiative, I'll be the first pilot in my family." Another clip showed a Latino engineering student at MIT, grinning as he explained, "I didn't think this world had space for me. Now I know it does." Tears welled up in the eyes of several attendees. Investors in the back row exchanged quiet nods, recognizing that Marcus had not just saved Delta from financial collapse, he'd made equity profitable. As the presentation closed, Marcus leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice to drive the final point home. "Bias is costly," he said slowly, letting each word land. "But accountability builds trust, and inclusion builds futures. That's not just a statement for airlines. That's a blueprint for every industry in America." The audience rose to its feet again, applause crashing like a wave. But Marcus stepped back from the podium, hands clasped lightly in front of him, his expression humble, grounded, unchanged. He didn't bask in the moment. He never had. Across the hall, cameras flashed, and reporters scrambled to file breaking stories. Marcus Hale's keynote redefines corporate equity. Social media exploded instantly, the hashtag Flight512Legacy trending globally within minutes. Backstage, Lisa approached Marcus quietly, her voice soft. "You know you've changed the world, right?" Marcus smiled faintly, shaking his head. "No, Lisa," he replied gently. "We all did." Sarah approached next, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder, nodding once. "Use your second chance well. There are lives depending on it." As the conference ended and attendees poured out into the evening air, something felt different, not just inside that room, but across an entire industry. In the days that followed, Marcus's speech would be replayed on every major network, studied in business schools, and quoted in boardrooms around the world. Within weeks, 2 Fortune 500 companies outside of aviation announced billion-dollar diversity initiatives, explicitly citing Flight 512 as their catalyst. Within months, Congress held hearings on workplace discrimination in transportation, banking, and hospitality, using Delta's reforms as a model for new national standards. Marcus returned to Hale Equity quietly, avoiding interviews and declining accolades. But the world kept watching, inspired by his calm insistence that true power doesn't shout, it acts. And as the sun set over Washington that night, one thing was undeniable. What began as humiliation in a first-class cabin had grown into a movement. Flight 512 had rewritten corporate history, redefined accountability, and restored dignity to millions who had been told they didn't belong. And for Marcus Hale, it was only the beginning. Thank you for watching this story. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next video, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. See you in the next one.